Thank you. I'm Margaret Carney. Welcome to the International Museum of Dinnerware Design's Zoom series. And this series is based on unforgettable dinnerware, which is very appropriate for our topic tonight, which is At the Table with Rebecca Sive. We will turn it over to our wonderful presenters this evening, which include Leslie Ferrin, Adrienne Spinozzi, Linda Sikora, and Carolyn Herrera-Perez.
Perfect. Thank you, Margaret. And thanks everyone for being here tonight. There's a wonderful mix in the group and I'm seeing friendly faces everywhere. We're here this evening to remember and reflect on the life and legacy of Rebecca Sive. Rebecca Sive was born on January 29th, 1950. She was a collector, a feminist activist, and one of the most steadfast champions of women's ceramic art in the United States. She died on July 15th, 2025, at the age of 75. We've been brought together because her life, shaped equally by political conviction and artistic devotion, leaves a profound legacy. A public career advancing women's equal opportunity in American life, and a private collection of contemporary American women's ceramics of remarkable depth. Rebecca's collecting was one expression of a much larger life devoted to activism, mentorship, and institution building. In her public career, Rebecca worked avidly to advance women's rights, organizing, advising civic leaders, founding organizations, and mentoring generations of young women. She understood systems, she understood power, and she understood how change actually happens, slowly, strategically, and in relationship with others. What's remarkable, at least to me, is how seamlessly she seemed to carry those same values into her life as a collector, though I know that it took a lot of intention and a lot of effort. Rebecca didn't just acquire work, she studied it, lived with it, wrote about it, shared it, and ultimately planned for its future. She believed that functional objects matter because they shape how we live, how we gather, and how we care for one another. Pots for her were not passive, they had agency. Perhaps most importantly, she understood that if women's work was going to be remembered, it had to be documented, had to be advocated for, and placed intentionally within institutions. So that conviction is at the heart of tonight's conversation. This evening's panel brings together people who knew Rebecca in different but deeply connected ways, as a collector, a collaborator, a champion, a friend. So allow me to introduce our guests tonight. We have Leslie Ferrin, and she is a leading specialist in contemporary ceramic art. She's recognized for her long-standing commitment to supporting artists and advancing scholarship. A galler since 1979, she has championed ceramic artists through exhibitions, publications, and institutional partnerships. She directs Ferrin Contemporary and authored Teapots Transformed, Exploration of an Object. Published in 2000, Teapots Transformed was a landmark study examining the teapot as a site of artistic innovation. Next, we have Linda Sikora, who is a potter and educated residing near Alfred, New York, where she has her studio practice and is a professor of ceramic art at Alfred University. Sikora studied at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design University and the University of Minnesota, Minneapolis. Her professional activities are national and international. She has been an artist in residence at the Archie Bray Foundation in Montana, Chun Kang College of Cultural Industry in Korea, Taiwan National College of the Arts, and Clay Edge in Australia. She's represented in numerous institutional collections, but just to name a few, the Racine Art Museum, LA County Museum of Art, the Everson Museum of Art, hello Garth, as well as the Gardener. Sikora is also a United States Artist 2020 Fellowship recipient. She has also been featured in PBS's Craft in America program on educators at craft schools. It's a wonderful episode, and was in conversation with Ben Carter on the podcast Tales of a Red Clay Rambler in 2023, another great resource. We now have Adrienne Spinozzi, who is an associate curator in the American Wing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where she is responsible for the American redware, stoneware, and art pottery collections. Her recent projects include Shapes from Out of Nowhere, ceramics from the Robert A. Ellison Jr. collection, an exhibition of 20th and 21st century abstract and non-representational ceramics. And Hear Me Now, the Black Potters of Old Edgefield, South Carolina, an exhibition on the contributions of the enslaved potters, both known and unknown, in Western South Carolina during the 19th century. She's currently working on a reinstallation of American ceramics that will span the late 19th century through today. So I know we're all looking forward to that. And if you're heading to NCECA this March in Detroit, you'll have a chance to see more of her curatorial work as she is the curator for the 2026 NCECA annual exhibition. The show, titled Absence Takes Form, explores themes of diaspora, memory, and place through clay. Ooh. As for myself, my name is Carolyn Herrera-Perez, and I'm an independent writer, researcher, and curator. Previously, I served as the inaugural curator of glass and ceramics at the Chazen Museum of Art at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I also helped launch the Chipstone Foundation publication titled Material Intelligence as a contributing editor. And before that, I served as a curatorial fellow at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum, where I worked under Cristina de Leon, Associate Curator of U.S. Latino Design in the Product Design and Decorative Arts Department. And with Peekskill Clay Studio in the mix today, I feel compelled to tell you I'm a potter turned researcher and curator. And part of that journey was at Peekskill Clay Studios, which is definitely a home away from home. So tonight is part presentation, part conversation, one that moves between personal memory and professional reflection, between lived experience and institutional context. So you'll hear first from Leslie Ferrin, who will offer a visual and contextual overview of Rebecca's collection and her long-term vision for it. From there, we'll open into a dialogue with Linda Sikora and Adrienne Spinozzi before inviting questions from you all. Our hope is that this evening feels less like a lecture and more like what Rebecca herself loved, a gathering around ideas, around objects, and around a shared commitment to sustaining women's work in clay. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce Leslie Ferrin, and I'll share this screen.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Carolyn. It's an honor to be invited to speak tonight about our dear friend, Rebecca Sive. I can't actually remember the first time I met Rebecca, but it was likely in Chicago through Bruce Robbins at Lil Street Clay and involved conversations about our shared interest in studio pottery and women potters. I immediately knew I had met somebody I could learn from. In the 90s, when Ferrin Gallery began showing at the Sofa Fairs, the sculpture, object, and functional art, Rebecca invited me and my business partner, Donald Clark, to visit her home and come for dinner during setup. She always welcomed our exhibiting artists, serving us home-cooked meals on beautifully set tables, surrounded by her beautiful collection. Rebecca Sive's collecting focus was an extension of her social activism and feminism. She co-founded the Midwest Women's Center in 1977 and was its first executive director. She organized Pioneering Women's Services Directory, served as the executive director of Playboy Foundation from 1981 to 1985, and helped elect and then became a senior advisor to Chicago Mayor Harold Washington. Later, she even contributed to the development of national women's issues agendas for the presidents Obama and Clinton. Her books, Every Day is Election Day, published in 2013, Vote Her In, published in 2018, and Make Her Story Your Story, published in 2022, extended her advocacy to a national audience. Be it as an activist, an organizer, or an advisor, Rebecca worked to correct structural omissions in her daily efforts. She brought that same advocacy to ceramics. A natural documentarian, she saved ephemera related to her collection. She wrote articles and spoke at conferences, including NCECA, about issues related to her collecting practices, and she had an action plan. This plan was the basis of a presentation in 2019 at Haystack Mountain School of Crafts monograph, like Craft and Legacy, Writing a History, Preserving a Field. This is now available through their archives as a resource. In her essay entitled American Women Artists Inspire and Celebrate Life for Too Few, Rebecca simply stated, "Here is my action plan. Recognize and celebrate the unrecognized. Record their history for posterity. Memorialize their work in institutions that matter. Ensure that they're paid equally for their work. Hire them so they can afford to make work. Advocate for them unceasingly among collectors, in art gallery circles, at conferences, and in trade and consumer media where reputations are built and resulting opportunities created. And for those of you who collect, buy, display, use, and gift women's art. Advocate for its exhibition and help make such exhibitions possible. And support women artists with scholarships, fellowships, residencies, curatorial appointments, and appointments to other important institutional roles." With this action plan in hand, Rebecca built a collection whose depth and range reflects the relationships and values that shaped her life. She wanted the work of women ceramicists to be seen on equal footing as their male colleagues, and that's exactly what she made happen. In time, Rebecca's collection grew to include more than 400 works, mostly by women, primarily working in the United States, but also from Canada, Great Britain, and Mexico. Her eye was drawn to figures, messages, shapes, surface, texture, and color. The works were acquired, brought home to talk to one another, and often told poignant stories of human struggle and achievement. Within the collection, there are a few artists Rebecca was particularly drawn to and engaged with over the years. She would seek their work out at studios, in shows, both in person and later online as digital photography made it possible to pursue her focused interest. Kathy King, now the Director of Education at the Ceramics Program, Office for the Arts at Harvard in Allston, was one of those whose graphic imagery and feminist text was a natural fit. Functionality and use was equally important. Rebecca lived with these works. She served meals on utilitarian forms. She gathered people around tables set with colorful fiesta ware, pots and bowls for serving, vases filled with flowers she grew in her Michigan garden, and kept the conversation rolling with ideas about politics, about representation, about craft. Later, in honor of the 50th anniversary of the Smithsonian American Art Museum's Renwick Gallery, she chose Gwendolyn Upolo's scoop bowl, a magnificent functional object by a female artist. Another artist she was dedicated to is Angelica Pozzo, whose mosaic Shrine to the Seasoned Salad prominently anchored Rebecca's Chicago living room. This work features plates and imagery that combine her love of food, garden, and farm-to-table cooking. In 2019, she invited Pozzo, a Cleveland-based artist, to be on the panel Yes, She Can, the 2019 Chipstone panel, along with Adrienne Spinozzi, who's here with us tonight. Montana educator and potter Julia Galloway is another artist Rebecca collected, used, and enjoyed a lively dialogue with. I'm sure Rebecca was inspired by Galloway's field guide for ceramic artisans, available digitally on the web and published, to pursue her own collecting action plan. While Rebecca had an extraordinary eye for form, surface, and energy, she was also attuned to momentum. In other words, she paid attention to how an artist's work shifted over time. That attentiveness is probably most clearly visible in her relationship with Linda Sikora. Rebecca collected Linda's work for over 25 years. She followed its evolution closely, how it changed, deepened, and as she liked to say, continued to stir. In 2017, she announced her desire to produce a catalog devoted entirely to Linda Sikora, titled, I Want to See Linda Sikora Everywhere I Go. Despite the challenges involved, she jumped into the project with her own photos, writing beautifully about the 46 pieces, such a Rebecca thing to do. With focus, determination, and commitment, she began to make the title statement possible. She immediately began sharing the catalog with curators at museums where she thought Linda's works belonged. She invited them to visit, suggested they choose works for their institution, and made promised gifts that included a Zimmer palette to the MFA Boston. Working with Adrienne Spinozzi at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Rebecca Sive promised a group of Sikora's pottery in celebration of the Met's 150th anniversary. Moving on to the other 399 artists in her collection, Rebecca soon produced a second catalog, an alphabetical guide to her collection. Rebecca understood that if women's work was going to be seen, it had to be recorded and placed. She was building such a record when she knew that one didn't yet exist. At the time of her death, works from Rebecca's collection had already begun entering institutions, and her estate continues that work now. Rebecca believed that collections only matter if they circulate physically, intellectually, and ethically. When I remember Rebecca, I picture her in her home, surrounded by her collection, vases filled with flowers, preparing a seasonal meal, and inviting people into conversation. One minute we'd be debating the politics of representation, the next, which pot to buy. She never separated her feminism from her collecting, and she never separated collecting from living. Rebecca left us a roadmap for her collection, but more than that, she left us a challenge to keep seeing women's work, to keep valuing function, to keep building structures that last. Her collection is not finished. It's ongoing through the institution it enters, through the artists it champions, and the conversations we continue tonight. Thank you, Rebecca. Carolyn, you're muted.
Thank you. And thank you for that too. Rebecca's collecting was remarkably intentional. And when I was prepping for this panel, I was really moved by Rebecca's action plan too. Her relationships with artists, her commitment to documentation, along with her thoughtful placement of artwork in institutions. It just seems so deliberate, influential, and then also so uniquely sincere. Okay, it feels especially important now to hear from two people who encountered that commitment from different vantage points. So I'm going to open up this conversation a little bit further and welcome Linda as an artist whose work Rebecca followed, lived with, and championed for decades, and Adrienne Spinozzi as a curator working with the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which Rebecca so intentionally engaged. So I'd like to begin our conversation by turning to both of you and asking a grounding question that brings us back to Rebecca herself. And I just want to make sure that our videos are on, because there's a lot of folks. I see you both. Perfect. And mics when you start speaking. So I'll start first with Linda. How did you first meet Rebecca, and what do you remember about that early encounter?
I think my first, yeah, I'm on. Okay. I think my first two encounters of Rebecca were only close encounters, in fact. In other words, I learned of Rebecca a while before I met her. And I because I had heard that she had purchased some work. And I have in mind as the first two times purchases she made at Lil Street Gallery. So this was soon after I completed graduate school. So it was in the 90s, the mid 90s. And it was really an honor to show at Lil Street. I had heard about Lil Street, and of course, Bruce Robbins had done such a great job in Chicago with that gallery. And I was just beginning to know it. And it felt to me like sort of the first visible professional platform of the work outside of school. So that was a big deal. There were a few works of myself and my partner, Matthew. And at that time, I was working in Minnesota, postgraduate school. And I recall these pieces. I'm not sure I'm remembering the actual ones that were there. So that was one encounter. And the other was at NCCA in Minneapolis. And again, well, let me just say that Bruce told me that she had purchased a teapot from that Lil Street show. Then the second one, NCCA, I heard that she was the purchaser of a piece in Minneapolis. So that's where I first heard of her, but had yet to meet her.
Amazing. In case anyone needs another resource, we did mention I want to see Linda Sikora wherever I go, and she speaks about these early interaction with Linda's work. And so mid 90s to collecting your work for over 25 years. That is such a long, long relationship. Now, Adrienne, when did you first meet Linda?
Yeah.
Excuse
Can you hear
me,
me
when
okay?
did you first? Yes,
Rebecca? Yeah.
Rebecca. Yeah.
Well, I think, and Leslie might be able to correct me if I'm wrong. I most certainly met Rebecca through Leslie, and I think it was maybe 2016 or 17. I can't recall the exact circumstances.
Hmm.
I too had heard of her through Leslie before meeting her. It probably was at one of the winter shows in New York. Um, I think the ceramics fairs were happening, the January fairs were going on, and Leslie, you may have brought her with you. Um, Pretty soon, she was reaching out to me on her own when she would come to visit New York. She would visit her mom in New Jersey. She and Steve would come and see some shows, and so we developed a very warm, very natural rapport shortly thereafter. And then I would always look forward to when she would come back, and we'd have these great conversations. We met over ceramics, but pretty quickly our discussions turned to other things. As I was saying, she was always interested in what I was doing, what projects, what other interests I had outside of work, politics, of course. And we talk about her books and her projects. And so, it was just a very warm and sort of generous relationship that and I really appreciated. It was very easy. Yeah.
Was there a point where her role shifted from a collector to something more collaborative for both of you? Or would you describe that relationship with Rebecca as collaborative at times in these conversations?
Should I go first?
Yeah, Linda.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think that really, because it was a while before I met her, I started to really connect to her through learning more about who she collected. And Leslie Ferrin was definitely a catalyst for the relationship proper. I think, Leslie, you might have introduced us and probably at an NCICA, and we would gather at these conferences and we talk about the field and about exhibitions, et cetera, as time went on. And pretty much every time Leslie and Rebecca were at NCICA, we would all get together and at least get dinner and try to make some good trouble here or there at the conference. But one of these times later on, Rebecca and I were both staying at a pod hotel. I think we were in New York. And this is where she shared a draft of this catalog she was hoping to produce. And I guess that was in some way a collaborative moment. Not that I had anything to do with it, because it was just sort of there as it was, as she had probably whipped it up over a weekend with the amount of energy she had. But through looking at images of her collection and discussing all the artists, and that was really, a big part of understanding her. It was the scope of the collection. I mean, there were people like, Sarah Coote, who was a really important teacher of mine in Nova Scotia, and Joan Bruneau, who was a colleague, Linda Christensen, and Julia, and Victoria Kristen, and Liz Quackenbush, and Sarah Yeager, and Jessica Brandel, and Anne Agee. I mean, all of these people that were in this group of objects that she had were so that was really, important in terms of understanding really the scope of who she was as a force, in the field as a collector, but also I think in her person as an activist politically as well.
What does it then
Carolyn,
mean?
I think just to sort of build on the collaboration aspect of it, in that question, she was so interested in a Q&A wherever she went. She would bring up a Q and we would have an A, and that would lead to more. And I mean, she was very verbal, and she would question the weight of a piece, the handle, the shape, the surface. She was extremely attentive, and she wanted to discuss it. And any of the work that had a narrative to it, that had to come out. So I think in our relationship, the collaboration started again with this writing where I was like, "Whoa, you did that over a weekend?" And
Wow.
or it was very quick. And she used her own
Yeah.
photos and her own writing, did her own layout, and I was like, "Well, when we do catalogs, it takes years, to pull it all together. Not necessarily years, but it's faster even now than it was when she wrote it." But I think that was the collaboration, was her intense conversations that she had wherever she went. And I think her relationship with Bobby Silverman was also like that. And
Mm.
I'm sure Steve can attest to many long dinners that they shared that may or may not have been as interesting to him as they were to everyone else. But you know, he hung in there with us, and the dinner parties at her house were always a lively mix of the outside world, the inside world, politics of our field, and politics of the world.
Mm. I'm curious now about Linda, what it means for you to have Rebecca collect your work over so long and to have it land into the catalog that she created. And you said that she introduced the concept to you. What was that like? And knowing her collection itself and the breadth of it, but also this, how she uniquely honed in on your work and your efforts. What was that like for you?
Well, um, I mean, I think that I don't know if I would call it collaborative because
Mhm.
one of the things that I really valued is that she stood within her this space as collector. She had a certain, scope and a vision and an idea that was connected to this larger, experience that she had in the world as a young person coming of age through politics and university education and work on the ground in the community, et cetera. And so, in that sense, she really held that space, and I really did appreciate that. So, the catalog itself and the collection itself was not collaborative, and in the sense that she chose those pieces, she purchased them, she put together. I knew nothing of it. It just sort of landed, and there it was. And she said, "Oh," and Rebecca. I mean, the amount of energy she had, she turned that out pretty quickly. And put it out there. So I'm not sure if that really gets at your question, but that boundary I think was really important of
Mm.
how she saw herself as collector and trying to generate a vision that I knew was connected to something that was much more complex than the person I had come to know one part of through the field and these annual encounters.
Yeah. Hmm. This brings me to Adrienne, actually. Now, I'm curious about, uh, I mean, Rebecca seems so well studied and also someone who wants to learn through these conversations and through the interactions with pots, but that at the same time, she is digging in deep and doing work. I know that she even kept a ceramic diary, which is a lovely note that came across in the catalog on Linda Sikora that she created. Adrienne, how would you frame Rebecca Sive as a collector and what perhaps is unique about her? Have you seen something like this before?
Well, I will just echo what Leslie and Linda they were just saying about her just being so so focused on her identity as a feminist. And I really see her collection as sort of the physical manifestation of her support of women. And for me, that's when I was invited to be a part of the panel. Leslie mentioned it earlier at INSECA in 2019, the Yes She Can. It was really at that moment that I saw her sort of much more as this, these different aspects of her feminist identity coming together, her work coming together. As a collector, I thought. Um, At first she was introducing me to artists that I really didn't know much about. I'm a curator of historical American ceramics, and she was so engaged and so enthusiastic about introducing these artists to me. And so um, I was taken by just how much she loved to surround herself by the work, how she was immersed in it. She surrounded herself by the collection. Ceramics, utilitarian and functional wares are meant to be held, meant to be used. And she did that. I mean, she really lived that life. I would love getting photos from her of, pictures of flowers from her garden and vases outside in her home in Michigan. And, she really was advocating every time we communicated. She was sort of revealing more of her collection to me in ways that collectors usually don't. I mean, they're usually sending, here are pictures, here are dimensions. Do you want to come and look at the work? But with Rebecca, it was a much more sort of natural way that she surrounded herself with her collection and continued to educate me throughout that process, throughout our relationship. I loved that she was so deeply connected to the objects and that she had them everywhere. She had them on her tables. She was using them, as Leslie was saying, her dinner parties. It was really it was wonderful to see somebody who also had other interests too. I mean, there was mention before of her feminist ephemera collection. I was absolutely stunned when Rebecca took me in her back. I guess it was her library in Chicago, and she showed me this collection. I'm thinking, she's a ceramic collector, but no, she had these other interests and was really collecting deeply in other areas as well.
So at what point did the offer of a gift of Linda Sikora's work come to the fore?
I was trying to remember this. So we signed the paperwork was all signed in 2020, but I think our discussions started probably around the time that this book was published, so a few years before. And I was actually looking through my notes, sort of preparing for this talk tonight, this discussion, and there were many different examples that we talked about. So it was definitely it was a process. It was, I went out to see the pieces. As you all know, the collection is quite large, and so it was very difficult to sort of figure out which ones we wanted in the collection. And I think it was a process with Rebecca. Linda, I don't remember if you were involved or if she had asked you for your opinions.
No,
Okay.
no, she,
Yeah.
no, she, that was clearly in, yeah, that was, she was clearly in her, yeah, collecting mode and
Yeah.
placing mode, but no, not at all. No.
Huh.
I mean, it was a wonderful process, and I have to say, working with collectors of all types, she really educated me and brought me along in the process, which
Mm.
I absolutely loved. Yeah, it was.
That was sort of one of the things that I immediately realized when I met her is that it was an exchange. She wanted to learn about the ceramics but she wanted to also mentor me in the conversations about the work that I was presenting to her and ways that I could be effective in the roles that I played. It was so seamless. From one minute I'm teaching her to the next minute she was teaching me. And I think that was probably the case throughout her life. I had no idea the extent of her world outside of ceramics until I attended the memorial in Chicago. And I think there were at least 10, if not more, speakers at this memorial, and Linda attended as well. And it was just remarkable how many people she touched. And then afterwards, when people came up to us and talked about her collection, they had no idea the importance of her collection and recognized that it was so unique. It was unique because of her, and it was unique because there really aren't any other, as far as I know from all the people that I've worked with, one that is so incredibly focused and diverse, within that focus.
Leslie, and yet when you think of it now, it all makes sense too, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She was able to build such a deep collection of work by women artists, and it totally complements the other aspects of her life. Yeah. And I want to echo and reiterate what was said earlier. She was such a doer. She was such an organizer, a connector. She loved community, but she was such a doer. If you asked her something, she would have it to you the next day. And that was also a real inspiration to me. Not only with collecting and her placing objects in collections and all that, but just with everything she was doing.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I went to the library this morning and got picked up a couple of books that she had in 1970 when they came out, where she mentioned as being quite influential, and they were mentioned in the wonderful piece that Steve wrote on her, and The Dialectic of Sex, and also this collection of essays, Sisterhood is Powerful. And you can imagine at that formative age, coming into your adulthood in that moment and reading these powerful writers who were just taking on, the politics at the time, the real foundation of sort of the heartbeat of the women's movement in the country. And she was on top of that game. I mean, this woman had a tremendous amount of energy and just an ethical sort of tenacity around how she, put herself in the world and how she wanted to affect it and see progress in it. So it was, just picking up these books, you start to feel the energy in the writing. It's quite amazing. But yes, that spirit, I think, never left her. When you think about her, go
I
ahead.
have a follow-up for you on that, which is when, and also I think Leslie too, because I believe that you met Rebecca at this point, perhaps in the 90s.
Probably.
Yeah.
I really don't know exactly when. I can't remember a time where I didn't know her.
Linda and Leslie, did you back then consider your efforts in the frame of feminism? And was there a point when you did? And Linda, you bring up these books, and we of course know how, in part, Rebecca was looking at your work. But back then, did you see that connection?
Oh, definitely.
Go ahead, Leslie, please.
I was a bean counter in the 70s, and as a young artist, it felt like there weren't opportunities for me as an artist making unique works. Like you could make production, but specifically that the opportunities to function professionally were not open to women in the same way they were to men. And the price points that we could ask for our work were they were low, and it wasn't just gendered. It was, the functionality, the utilitarian, the type of business we were in as craftspeople showing their work, living the back to the land. It was a low priced, and the first shows at museums that were solo exhibitions for women. There were very few that were, if you did the percentages, I was constantly counting. And these were things that Rebecca and I talked about all the time. So, when Viola Fry got her solo exhibition because she was excluded from the group exhibition, we all cheered on that. And it was a momentous
Talking about
moment.
the Whitney?
The one at the Whitney, when Betty Woodman held out until she got us the first solo show at the Met for a living artist. I mean, these were real milestones, and Rebecca recognized those. And I think, those were things that meant a lot to her and a lot to me. And I don't think it was ever, not spoken about as she interacted with, artists like Kathy King and Julia Galloway and Angelica and whoever was there to talk to her.
Mm.
Yeah, I think in terms of, to that question, I think in my case, as a person very interested in education and very interested in teaching and beginning to teach, sabbatical replacements at different universities, at that time, many of the departments were still run by men. And so she was very sensitive to professional advancement of women across all realms in her work. And I think in some way, she, certainly she was interested in the studio output, but I think she was also interested in this dual role of studio output and, a track I was very passionate about as well, which was working as an educator in the field.
Mm. Thank you. I know oh my gosh, the time has been flying already. I have to make perhaps a sharp shift into a different zone of function, because I don't want to leave that unsaid as well. So it's perhaps a little bit abstract. Rebecca often spoke about pots having agency and as active participants in daily life rather than passive objects. And it seems like you and her shared that sentiment. Can you tell us some more about what it means for a pot to have agency? And did you have this conversation with Rebecca? If so, please tell us more.
Well, I wish I would have, but no, I
Yeah.
did not. But yes, that is, I mean, it was actually reading the catalog that she put together that made me realize that that was her hook into my work. And I think early on, as I was in academia, this idea of agency was coming into my conversation, about the work. So that's definitely what connected us in some way because she understood that through her own professional progress. And, in the catalog she produced, the places in the writing that Rebecca quotes me are reflecting on that idea of agency. So, um, for example, there's a section here um, she quotes me, quote, "We tend to think about household matter or things, including functional pottery, as props in our human will dramas, but I'm suggesting that effective pots have affect and agency. This vitality brings into the room a capacity to script what occurs." I think that probably might have been the sentence that decided for her that she would start collecting my work and sort of remain the underpinning, perhaps. So that actually
Yeah.
was the hook, definitely. And there were other places. There's a sentence in here that I was trying to figure out what it meant, and it was Sikora's work has lasted most of all for me, and I was trying to think about what that meant. And then from the invitation to this panel and from your question about agency, I thought, oh, that's what it is. And by looking through Sisterhood is Powerful and the dialectic of sex, I thought, oh, that was the hook. The hook was this idea of thinking about functional pots as agentive in the world. They're not just passive, but their mere presence changes the script of what happens in the household space. It changes how things are felt and done and how they occur. So that really was it. And so I was really impressed when I saw that question because it led me to this place. And I thought, oh, okay, Carolyn's onto this before I am. So yes.
Thank you. Okay. I'm not gonna lie, I'm like, maybe this is a little obtuse. I'm so glad it led to something generative. Um, because I I
Mhm.
mean, even us all talking amongst each other, these pots are stirring and they're generating this conversation. They're changing so much. I want to turn to Adrienne now to see how functional works like this that are perhaps stirring in Rebecca's home and stirring in other homes, how you bring that to the museum. So question would be, how do you think about functional objects in the Met's American wing? How might we convey the impact of functional objects once they're removed from the home? What can you tell us?
Well, I'll just start by saying I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Met's American Wing, but you might not know that our utilitarian and functional decorative arts collection is really the founding collection of the American Wing. Our paintings and sculptures came much later. So really, we have it's in our DNA of the department. Long history of collecting, presenting, interpreting these objects. And we also have a deep commitment to presenting it in different contexts. So we have a suite of period rooms, these domestic settings, which allowed people to understand these original contexts, however you might feel about period rooms. We also have taxonomical displays where we group all like objects together, chronological marches through materials, and through stylistic and different historical periods. But we're also looking to really move into new ways of encouraging people to engage with these objects. So thematically, we're also looking at mixed media presentations, thinking about visual connections across different departments. And then also really thinking about how our visitors are engaging with these objects outside the museum and how it's very different once they walk into the walls of the museum. And so we're sort of looking and thinking about new ways of either interpreting, bringing in other perspectives. It's sometimes a challenge, I will say. You see people walk right through the galleries, the decorative arts galleries, on their way to an exhibition or a show. And so that's really the role of the curator, to really try to pull the stories out of these objects and make people slow down, stop, appreciate a form, appreciate a profile, look at the lines of a work, the lines of an object. And Linda's work, I'll just say, these three objects that Rebecca has so generously given to the museum, they're not yet in the Nets collection. I'm really looking forward to making that move from Michigan to New York City and to incorporating these pieces, because I think that people will be really surprised when they look at these very familiar forms, right? This teapot form or a covered jar, and look at just the robust, sublime form and really hone in on on the profile, on the stunning surface embellishment. Linda, your work is both imaginative and rooted in tradition at once. And so there's so much to get from these objects. And I think it'll be really exciting to see them put into a much larger context with historical pieces and with more contemporary works.
Perfect. You beat me to the punch. I wanted to know how Linda's works would be engaged at the Met in the future. So thank you.
I think there are many different ways in which we can display them.
I am looking at the time, and I feel like it's a good moment to begin a close here. So I'm going to come back in and form my conclusion, and then we'll open up for Q&A. But I want to name what has been most consistent across tonight's conversation. Rebecca Sive's impact came from how she showed up again and again for artists, for their work, and for the futures she imagined for it. She built relationships over years and decades, paid close attention to change and progress, and acted on what she believed mattered. We've heard about her generosity, not as something casual or spontaneous, but as something practiced and intentional. Rebecca was generous with her resources, but also with her curiosity and her energy and her advocacy. It seems like across the board, we've said that she showed up and she followed through and she paid attention to the long-term view. And what's been especially powerful this evening is seeing how those qualities touch different spheres, be it Leslie Ferrin and her gallery, Linda Sikora and her studio, and Adrienne Spinozzi and the Met's collection to come. And for Rebecca, there seemed no hard lines separating those zones. For example, the dining room table in her home was as important as the gallery. The conversation was as important as the object. And that brings us to legacy. Rebecca did not leave the future of her collection to chance. She planned carefully with the same clarity and determination that shaped her activism and her collecting. Through her estate, works from her collection are continuing to enter institutions, not as static artifacts, but as active participants in ongoing histories of American ceramics and women's creative work. So the work is still unfolding, and in that sense, Rebecca's legacy is not complete. It is in motion. I think she would have really appreciated that. Before we conclude, I want to extend my deepest thanks to our panelists. To Leslie Ferrin, thank you for setting the stage so beautifully and for your decades-long commitment to artists and to this field of ours. To Linda Sikora, thank you for sharing your reflections with such clarity and generosity and for reminding us of the power of objects that continue to stir. And Adrienne Spinozzi, thank you for offering insight into how these works live within institutions and will continue to. I also want to thank the team at the International Museum of Dinnerware Design for hosting this conversation and for their ongoing commitment to the study and celebration of functional objects. But finally, I also want to extend a truly heartfelt thank you to Steve Tomaszewski, Rebecca's husband, who I know is in the audience, for allowing us this evening to reflect on her life and legacy and to celebrate the care, intention, and conviction that shaped her work as a collector and an advocate. I know we're all very grateful for his generosity in sharing Rebecca's story with us all and for his continued support of the efforts that she put in motion. So I'd now love to open the conversation to questions from our audience, and I believe Bill will help us tend to the Q&A. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for this fabulous panel. I've learned so much. I knew Rebecca, but not like each one of you differently knew her. So I learned a lot. She used to support the museum by coming to our invitational and juried exhibitions, and I would pretty much say always purchasing Linda Sikora's work and other people's, but she was very supportive and her message was always loud and clear. We knew where we were, and my husband and I both visited their home when it was in Chicago. We never made it to the one in Michigan, which was actually closer to Ann Arbor when we were there, but we really enjoyed our visit to the home in Chicago and seeing the collection and the warm welcome that we got. So there's a lot of wonderful comments, and I would thank all of you, but also Leslie Ferrin for lovingly adding things into the chat. So any of you who have questions what NCECA is, National Council on Ceramic, I'm going to get around, Education for the Ceramic Arts, and how to attach, to learn more about NCECA. You can go in the chat and you can find out information and other articles that have been published and Rebecca's obituary. I mean, all the information is there. And then there were some good questions. And Steve, I have a question about, someone asked about what Rebecca thought about Judy Chicago's dinner party. And was that your answer, that she had helped support that when it was shown in Chicago? So Steve, if you're there, if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, she was actually the first person to organize a showing of the dinner party in Chicago. It was a benefit for the Midwest Women's Center. That was many, many years ago. And was very committed to the project, and it was a wonderful event. The whole dinner party was on display in Chicago for some period of time. I don't remember exactly how long, but she was a big supporter of that.
Okay, that's good. I didn't have a question like that. I thought that was really a great question. So thank you, whoever asked that. So Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you. Do you have other questions?
Yeah, there are a few more questions. As Margaret mentioned, Leslie Ferrin posted a few links. And um, Leslie, could you say a little bit about some of the links that you posted?
Well, we have been gathering information. I will be also doing one of the past masters presentation at the NCCA conference. So the conference takes place in Detroit in March. The link to the conference is there. The past masters program, I believe, takes place on Wednesday before the conference actually starts. They will be recorded and there'll be more information available about the conference. The conference includes opportunities to go see exhibits, one of which Adrienne is the curator for. So you'll be able to find us at the reception, I'm sure, if nothing else. Um, the We've been gathering information and putting links together, one of which was a really fantastic article that was in American Craft in I think it was 2019. I just looked it up, put it in the chat. The photography that we saw, these beautiful photographs of Rebecca and the collection were taken by the American Craft photographer. So his name is Adam Ryan Morris, and I really want to thank him for offering his photography to us to present in this YouTube living on forever presentation and use in the NCCA journal where there's a longer essay. And so until there's an independent website about Rebecca and her life, because there is so much that can be added, we hosted a page on the Ferrin Contemporary site. It's in our collections section. And we're just plugging in all these things, like this YouTube will be a link there, and the obituary and the article at American Craft. So it's kind of like going to be an archival site for the collection. All that said, there may become an independent collection that has even more about this remarkable woman and all of her connections to the politics of Chicago and her writings and combining all of that. So that's one of the, I think, things I would love to see it, move outside of just our tree in Ferrin Contemporary. So those are in the chat, but we'll also keep adding them to our website page about Rebecca's collection until an independent one is set up. And I would suggest that if any of you are on Facebook, she posted a lot of wonderful things that she thought about during her life. So you'll see pictures of her flowers in her garden and her vases filled with flowers. She really loved that ability to share in social media when it used to be fun. And I know that if there is the woo-woo world of Rebecca connecting, she's watching us now, and she is so happy that this conversation is taking place and her friends are together, and she knows that there's seeds being planted every day with her collection and the conversations that take place around it.
So one last question.
Okay.
The question is, what was her background and how did she come to collect ceramics?
Leslie, I'd be happy to answer this unless you
go ahead, because I
like to
don't
go.
have the answer to how did she.
I
think we
feel
read
like
about
Steve,
it, but
Steve is also in the audience too. But as I understand it, she was exposed to ceramics at a really young age. Her mom was
right. It's coming back.
it's coming back. Was a bit of a collector herself, be it studio pottery or dinnerwares, porcelains. But she went to the Rockland Foundation, where Karen Carnes was on faculty, and I believe took some pottery classes there. I don't believe with the Karen Carnes, but certainly at the same institution. And then it was during, it seems, her college years, she went to Puerto Rico and bought her first amphora without handles. She was taken with ceramics from a young age and then finally launched into collecting, I think perhaps in Chicago, and especially at Lowell Street Art Center. I think that's where things really took off was then. Is that correct, Steve?
Is Bruce in the audience? Bruce Robbins?
I invited him.
I saw him on the list. And
Yeah, Bruce signed up early. He actually logged on like 2 hours before this started. So, and I didn't contact him because we were busy, but I figured he'd either stay on or he'd come back on. But he was here.
Well, I sent him the link, but when in those days when Lil Street was actually on Lil Street, it was possible to sort of walk through various artists' cubby holes, gallery, little where they were working, and meet the artists and purchase their pots as you went. It was a very it was a small kind of operation where you could actually be directly in touch with many of the artists, and that's where Rebecca bought a lot of her early pots. She also bought a few early pots from the Schneider Bloom Gallery, and Esther Sachs had a gallery in Chicago also. She got to know those people, the galleries. Her office was not too far away from Superior Street in Chicago, which is where a lot of the galleries were in those days. So that was really sort of,
and Nathan too. I mean, she
and
was
Nathan
very
later,
friendly.
a little bit later, but yes, Ann Nathan became a very close friend. Ann Nathan was a wonderful person and a very good mentor to Rebecca on collecting. So those were sort of the early years of her purchasing when we were living in our house before we moved into our apartment. But which was somewhat larger and had more space for the collection. But those were her early, I think, influences, and Bruce in particular, really facilitated the ability.
Hey, here he is.
Get to know the artist in person.
Yeah, it was a long time ago, huh, Steve?
Yeah, it was.
Those were the good old days.
Mm-hmm. Well, the good old days aren't necessarily over, but it was a little closer, closer connection between the artist and the collector, I suppose. But that's always been a big part of Rebecca's collecting, was actually getting to know the people whose work she was collecting.
Yeah, she was a great collector and a really great person. So, yeah. Trying to see when we met. She curated a show for us back in the, I think, early 80s, if I can remember, but it was a great show, but it's hard to remember those days.
Well, the show that she curated at Lil Street was featured 3 artists. It was Angelica Pozzo was one,
right?
Jessica Bohus, who's a Michigan-based artist who was then doing some ceramics, although more after that she became much more of a glass and a wire sculpture artist. And Tanya Schultz, a Louisiana artist whose work Rebecca has a tremendously large, probably even more stuff of Tanya's than of Linda Sikora's. But all 3 of them were people she was great champions of, and it was very important to her to be able to curate that exhibit.
Yeah, that was a great show. And Leslie Ferrin, that was a great speech. And
well, I've had some really good support. Carolyn and I have been working on this together, and I learned something doing this, that I might be moving out of being third person to first person, because now I am speaking about my own personal experience. And so it was really great having Carolyn organized so that I could speak about what I did with Rebecca and my experience with it, instead of trying to run the show at the same time.
It was very personal, and I thought it was really beautifully done.
Well, you were part of it all.
We're still doing it, aren't we? We just had our 50th
Apparently.
anniversary. Apparently, right. Is Linda there? I don't see her. Hi, Linda. No.
I think we're going to wrap this up. And
Okay.
thank you all very much. It's been wonderfully educating and a beautiful experience for myself, and I hope most of you. So thank you, everyone, for attending, and thank you to the presenters and to Steve and to Bruce Robbins and everyone, and have a good evening.